Hello and welcome to the Carbonless Leadership Series. This is the first of 3 conversations around issues relating to carbon. And Tech for Impact has joined with Carbonless because we believe that the carbon theme in Asia is not getting the necessary attention. After all, Asia is already responsible for more than 50% of the world's CO2 emissions. And given the region's development momentum, this will only ever become larger. The need for action has never been greater. There is, of course, a growing awareness of this situation globally, and an increasing number of countries have already committed to a goal of carbon neutrality, and many companies too. But are we here in Asia doing enough? Are the region's companies, governments, and financial professionals doing enough? Well, we believe that the first step towards any action is constructive engagement. Conversations, dialogues, and discussion all contribute towards greater knowledge, greater understanding, and greater action. And the process of transition, we hope, will begin right here. Now, we'll be considering the carbon issue through 3 different lenses over the coming weeks. There'll be a policy lens, a financial lens, and on this first conversation, we'll be picking up the corporate lens. And all these conversations will culminate on March the 31st in the inaugural Carbonless Asia Forum. And you can learn more about that by visiting the website, carbonless.asia. But today, we're kicking off with a look at corporate attitudes towards decarbonization and carbon mitigation. And I have with me today to have this conversation 3 senior corporate representatives to discuss issues like their own company's response to the carbon question, their plans for the future, and more general themes like the trajectory of corporate thinking and action, and what steps companies in Asia should be focusing on as increasing public awareness leads to greater demands for action. So let me introduce the panel to you. They join me now. And they come from all corners of the world. I'm joined in Singapore by Camille Levy, in San Francisco by Ilaria Chan, and by Jay Mariyappan, who is in KL. And I'll introduce them more formally one by one. Ilaria, I'll begin with you since you're sitting right next to me here. Ilaria Chan is with Grab. She is Group Advisor, Sustainability, and you can read more about her bio down there. She was formerly an Executive Director of Sales and Trading at Goldman Sachs. She's on the board of trustees of a couple of foundations and advisor to other financial venture capital companies. And as you can see at the bottom, she has a very rich cultural and social life as well, singing, playing piano, and a food critic and restaurant judge. And I wish we could talk about that today, Ilaria, but unfortunately we'll have to leave that to a future conversation. In Singapore, Camille Levy is with GE. She has been with GE for about 14 years. Her passions are the energy industry, so she's in the right place. She began her career as an energy economist with Serra, which is a US-based consulting firm, and has been part of Alstom's corporate strategy team. Her passions include diversity and women's empowerment. Camille, welcome to you. Glad to have you along. And in Kuala Lumpur, Jay Mariyappan is with Petronas, which is the Malaysian state oil company. He spent 20 years working in the power industry and financial services with a focus on clean energy, but his tenure at Petronas has been just a few years. And if I'm right in saying, Jay, the position itself has been a relatively new one. You can see the rest previously stints in utility planning, project development. He holds his PhD from Imperial College in London in decentralized energy and an executive MBA from the Kellogg School of Management. Plenty more about their bios can be found online, obviously, at LinkedIn, so I'd encourage you to go and check them out. But for now, I hope that's given a fair representation of your interests and your backgrounds, panel. And thank you very much indeed for being with us. So the questions that we're here to discuss are extremely broad and extremely complex. So I'm not going to ask any of you to solve them for us, and I'm not going to expect that any of you have got complete understanding or answers to the challenges of decarbonization. But as I said at the beginning, what we're trying to do here is to create a situation where we can at least sketch out a framework for debate about carbon in Asia, and try and give a sense of what needs to be done, what is being done, and what action can be taken. And hopefully begin the process of conversation and community engagement that will lead to meaningful action. So let's start by asking just a couple of generalized questions. And Jay, I'll begin with you since you were the last introduction there. I just want to ask you, the corporate sector, what part can and should it play in driving the decarbonization conversation, in helping us to achieve net zero?
Thanks, Tamo, and good morning to everybody. I think this question, most corporates are trying to tackle at the moment and trying to think. So if you think about it, most corporates have their customers, they have their staff, they have their shareholders, and they have their financiers. Now, all of those stakeholders are calling for, in some way or other, mitigation towards climate change and pushing the sustainability agenda. So corporates, because they have a lot of influence both on those stakeholders but also on things like emissions, they have to do something.
That comment in itself brings us on to one of the key issues about corporate involvement. And Camille, I'll put this to you as someone who works for a major corporation, a global multinational corporation. As Jay said, corporates have a duty to act, but a lot of corporates, and indeed a lot of external observers, will say, yes, but we also have a duty to respond to the consumer. And the consumer is unwilling to pay the prices necessary to deliver the kind of results that they want. The consumer is much more willing to accept the trade-off between a carbon-heavy process if they can get a cheaper price on that. So just within that framework, I'll ask you the same question. I mean, what role should corporates be playing, both ethically and in response to market forces and consumer forces?
Well, that's a really interesting question, because I think this is really at the crux of the matter these days, which is, on the one hand, you have a clear sustainable agenda where consumers, corporate are asking for cleaner solutions, less CO2 emissions. But on the other hand, you still have, particularly in Asia, quite a lot of places where people are still lacking electricity, where electricity and energy in general is absolutely central to growth. So really what corporations are trying to do, and GE is an example, is really trying to find the right balance between the sustainability agenda and the corporate and the affordability of electricity. So within GE, that's a challenge that we tackle on a regular basis, because as GE, as you say, very large organization, we operate across the whole chain of energy, from renewables, wind, hydro, all the way to gas and coal. And in this region, as the CEO of Steam Power, which basically builds and maintains coal and nuclear power plants, we're really trying to strike that balance by saying, hey, let's bring the best available technology. Let's ensure that we have, to the extent possible, yes, products which maybe are not seen as the most advanced in terms of carbon, but which enable a country like Vietnam or a country like Indonesia to strike this balance between affordability and environmental impact. Really, what we believe is technology will help as we transition. We need to be able to balance those two. Not an easy task, but that's really what our customers are asking for, to say, hey, yes, we have very clearly, and a lot of utilities in the regions, a very, very aggressive carbon agenda, like we have within GE for the internal operations, but they're also mindful that electricity is needed to grow, and that there is a certain level that you need to strike.
Ilaria, same to you. I mean, what do you think is the corporate role in this entire conversation? And speak a little bit, if you would, to the ethical component. A lot of conversation in the corporate world in recent years has focused on the idea that perhaps the definition of stakeholder and stakeholder responsibility should be a little bit more broad. So within that context, do you think corporations have an ethical responsibility to act on climate change on behalf of the stakeholders, even if the consumer is not pushing for it?
Well, I think there is, these are such complex issues but to make it as simple as possible, you can feel an ethical responsibility, and I think we all should, because otherwise it implies some kind of destruction in future. And right now, I think every company is asking themselves, how are they contributing to nations, especially in developing nations, when a lot of things are being shaped. Now, a lot of things that Jay and Camille highlighted, it's really real. And I say that because every portion of the stakeholder at different times want different things, which is why it is so hard to juggle, and it takes so much wisdom, and you can never perfectly get it right. Your shareholders want maximum value in their investments. Your customers want unlimited, perfect service that makes them feel great, and they will always jump on the first thing they can complain because they are entitled to it. And then you have all the other people who are employed in the ecosystem, right? And at any given point, you move one variable, you will end up pleasing and displeasing someone at the same time. So something like decarbonization, even though people think, oh, of course, it has to be good for everyone. Yes, if you want to make a blank statement, but no, if you kind of zoom in on one very simple example, right? EVs are actually still more expensive, especially in regions that don't have an abundant supply. So if you're a car owner or you are a rental company, we have rental services where we own the vehicle and we lease it out to drivers. You are not that incentivized to buy a lot of electric vehicles. However, for the drivers, if they don't own the vehicle, and if all the infrastructure is being subsidized and provided, it's cheaper to pay for electric car versus normal petrol. And if you are people who are operating the charging station, then it's almost like something like $50,000 in Singapore for one power charging station. All of these things move together. And so I think it's an extremely difficult problem. And yes, it is an ethical responsibility, but like everything in life, we cannot put a oversimplified answer to a very complex problem.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, the reality is we're going to have to try and start finding some answers to some of these questions, aren't we? Because they're not going away. They're only going to get worse. Let me just then quickly get from you a very short, sharp response to another fairly general question. Do you, as a corporation, within your corporation, I'm not asking you to speak on behalf of the corporation in generally, but do you get a sense that within your corporation there is a sense that sustainability and the challenge of carbon is a challenge, as in a threat, or is it an opportunity? Just one or two words on that.
Of course, for sure, it's a challenge, and I think I can speak. It's a healthy one. It sometimes is threatening, but like all challenges, it highlights a problem that we have to solve. And most tech companies these days, if you're successful, you're solving some kind of a problem. But the whole region in Southeast Asia is lagging US and Europe, right? We can have many examples on that. So right now, it's still an infancy and nascent stage for Southeast Asia to respond in a large-scale way to make it possible. Now, as a company for Grab, we're in transportation, and transportation has always been one of the heaviest sector that contributes to CO2 emissions. So of course, it is at the forefront of our minds on how we can contribute to be the solution to a greener future. So even as of a few years ago, before all this became such a hot and urgent topic right now, Grab has already started to engage with partners, investors like Hyundai, for example, Toyota. They've been our partners.
Sorry to interrupt, Ilaria.
Doing some work. Yeah.
We'll get onto the specific measures that you're taking in a moment. I just want to keep it on a fairly general perspective first, and I'll come to Camille. I mean, Camille, you've also, as you said, GE is doing an awful lot. Does GE do this because they think it's an ethical responsibility, or do they see an opportunity business-wise? Does it make business sense to now engage with the sustainability and the decarbonization movement?
Well, I think for us primarily is GE. It's a tremendous business opportunity. Of course, we feel an obligation to do something because of the importance we have for the society. But very clearly, it's a great business opportunity. If I'm talking from a STEAM perspective, obviously my in the past were building new build coal plants. So this has posed a great challenge. We've announced our intention to exit coal new build. But if you look, it also creates a tremendous opportunity in terms of trying to help our customers transition in the find their position in the energy transition, continue to operate plants to ensure reliability. So definitely a huge business opportunity.
Jay, I guess for you, this has got to be a difficult question. I mean, in the fossil fuel business, a lot of these questions are going to be really very close to home. How do you think, how does Petronas look at this whole movement?
I think, as you may know, last year, Petronas made the decision to set a 2050 net zero carbon emissions target, the first Asian oil and gas company to do so. And that is obviously a big challenge for an oil and gas company to do so, but it presents a really good opportunity. The opportunity means you really focus right across your business in your operational excellence. So those things that can reduce emissions, which also improve your cost base. You look at your portfolio mix. So right across the business, what have we got? And we look at it from a carbon lens as well. And then the business that I'm in, which is new energy, which is renewables in Asia, which is likely to provide maybe 60% of new capacity additions over the next coming decades. It's a real opportunity as a business to grow in this area. And this can provide other products to customers that, as Ilaria mentioned, some of them want these different products that have a low carbon intensity footprint.
Let's break down, Jay, exactly what it means then to have such targets. Tell me, you set a zero carbon target date. Is there a very precise and specific roadmap to getting there? Do you have interim short-term targets? What are they? How does that strategy look like in detail?
Yeah. So, as I mentioned, Taylor, it's a big challenge, but we've looked at it very carefully and systematically right across the business. So we're looking out to 2050, but we have clear targets towards keeping our emissions down to 49.5 million tons by 2025. And all our businesses right across, whether it's upstream, the midstream businesses that I'm in gas and new energy, and downstream, will all have targets within their businesses. Now, the means to do or to meet those targets are quite different, but I mentioned operational excellence, so efficiency, all the efficiency measures that you can do. You have switching in the portfolio, so more contribution from revenues from things like renewables, green hydrogen, and others. Then you have also some areas where we could even look at offsets, which is a possibility and an option also. And now when we take this out to 2050, obviously these activities ramp up. And it means that the portfolio may look very different than it looks today.
Just to finish off this particular thought, Jay, as far as those targets are concerned, tell me about the internal culture of meeting those. Does Petronas regard employees as being a part of achieving those targets? And if so, what is the corporate line on how the employees should behave and how the employees can be leveraged to achieve those goals? And also consumers and other stakeholders. Is there a strategy for them?
Yeah. So I think if we take employees to start off with, if you see the commitments that are made by companies, including Petronas, the staff are, a key part of that. And I think when we announced our 2050 net zero carbon emissions target, it was a real rallying cry for the staff. And I've been amazed really by right across the business, whether it's staff from upstream or downstream, and certainly obviously in our renewables division, everybody is really trying to find solutions that help us meet our goals and provide new revenue streams for the company. So it's really acted as a catalyst for that. And then secondly, I think on the customer side, since we announced this, we've also had a lot of engagement with our customers who want to have products that help them meet their sustainability goals. So one of the things that I'm doing or involved in, for example, is we provide a capex-less solar solution to a lot of corporate, commercial and industrial customers, whereby we're saving their energy bills as well as reducing their carbon footprint through renewable energy. And there's a lot of that engagement going on right across our customers. So some customers are looking at green hydrogen, other types of solutions. And if we can provide that in a reliable and affordable way, I think it's good for both our staff and the customer itself.
That's great. I wasn't picking on you, Jay. I'm going to ask the same thing of our other two panelists, giving them a bit of time to field that question, because same things to you. Camille, let me begin with you. Give me a sense of the GE roadmap, its specific goals, its specific thinking on this, and the extent to which the internal employees and the external stakeholders are engaged in achieving those goals.
Well, I think when it relates to really internal goals, it really builds off a long story for GE. I mean, we've been reducing our CO2 emissions since 2011, when we really started measuring and setting internal goals, and we've been able to reduce CO2 emissions from our operations by 20% since 2011. I guess just to give you a sense of the scale, when we're talking reducing emissions from internal operations, we're talking 1,000 facilities, everything from big manufacturing sites to workshop to offices. So we have set ourselves an internal target to be CO2 neutral by 2030 for our internal operations. And that's really something that when we've made those broader commitments a few months back, along with a number of other companies, I think very similar to what Jay was saying, this has really been a rally for our employees, and really something which at the local level, you have local initiatives to try to find ways to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, to reduce energy consumption in our sites to really drive this. The second place which is really driving employee engagements is around our products. Because as GE, obviously, we're a major technology company. So the fundamental way we've been engaging our employees, but also obviously our customers, is by bringing new environmental friendly products. GE has just introduced the largest offshore wind turbine in the world, which is almost 13 megawatts. We also have a large number of records in terms of new technologies for gas power plants, hydro. And I think this, really putting the technology front and center is one of the key ways that GE, by continuing to invest major R&D efforts into green technology, I think this is really one of the ways where we're engaging our employees and our customers. And interestingly, I think what's really changing in the past, I would say 5 to 6 years, is the amount of interactions we're having with our customers on, hey, we need to find a solution that makes sense, but finding a solution that makes sense is always within the balance of, we have environmental goals, but it needs to make sense from a business perspective. So it needs to have the right level of returns, and it also needs to be a reliable solution. So when you're looking within the energy sphere, I mean, the crisis that we've seen in Texas, that we've seen in Japan earlier on, or in Australia in terms of electricity supply, I think this is also growing in terms of what's on our employees' mind, what's on our consumers' minds, and trying to make sure that we have the right balance and the right pace. So I think more to come on that within every corporation.
All right, and Ilaria, same to you. Tell me about the GRAB context.
Sure, I guess for us, we're still assessing a lot of things. So a lot of things we're not really announcing to the public yet, but I think that for sure it is front and foremost in our agenda. Electric vehicle is really a very large part of all this because of what we do. And of course, there's a part where we also have food delivery services where we are looking also at waste pollution from cutlery, et cetera, which we are also trying to eliminate and giving customers the choice to not use plastic cutlery, for example. But looking at the EV part is really where we have been focusing. So for example, we have been building out a mixed fleet of more hybrid and 2-wheel and 4-wheel electric options, right? And actually there's a variety of vehicles like cars, there's motorbikes, there's e-mopeds, there's scooters. So as you know, Southeast Asia has a wide range. So we have launched EV transport options and working, of course, with the government to make sure that the infrastructure is supporting it. But it is still, like I said, in very nascent stages. So we've been
do you have a specific carbon commitment?
We are developing that. And we are definitely trying to assess it, what is actually reasonable and what isn't. Because for us, there's a lot of growth. There's a lot of different factors. So when we're ready, we definitely will announce it, and we want to make sure that we're honoring that. But for now, we're still internally assessing what is realistic. What
exactly is the interaction with government? Tell me about the experiences that you're having in terms of the legal, the regulatory, the political, the policy landscapes that feed into this conversation, because obviously companies can only do as much as is allowed within the existing corporate regulatory system. So can you give us a sense of how you think within Asia, and I say this realizing obviously that Asia is not a single entity, but to tell me the thoughts that come to your head in this context.
Yeah, I mean, we cannot do anything without collaboration with governments. So for example, in Indonesia, right, when we look at electric vehicle ecosystem roadmap, we have to launch it and look at it with the Indonesian government because we have to support EV policies together. We have to.
Are you finding them amenable? Is the general sense that you're getting from policymakers that they're on board with the net zero, or are there still pockets of resistance or a general reticence?
Well, I think there's so many people involved, right? But I'm confident actually that all the governments know the urgency. It's just that they also have to assess in their country what target makes sense. And also, you don't just suddenly say, hey, let's just suddenly whip out charging stations everywhere. There are even zones that don't support that kind of power supply. So I think, for example, Indonesia is the largest country in Southeast Asia. They have recently made efforts to make sure that nickel exports are being limited so that they can now produce their own lithium battery, which is key to support this whole EV rollout. But that takes time. So I think that all those nuances play into how quick they can actually give numbers and announce to it and be binding to it.
Camille, same to you. I mean, your operations span the globe. So can you give us a sense of whether the experience in Asia when it comes to the broader landscape of policy is different to that elsewhere? And if so, how? And what can be done about it? What's happening now?
Well, it's actually interesting because when I came to Asia almost 3 years ago, I was hearing a lot of, hey, you're coming into a region where compared to Europe, compared to maybe America, things are really slow, where you'll continue to see fossil fuels playing the biggest role. But I've actually found very interestingly that there is a lot of interesting discussions with governments. And again, I'm saying governments because it's really, you see very different situations from one country to the other. But what I found interesting is how much governments in this region have been learning from the issues they've seen in other parts of the world and have really taken the time. Some people would say it's a bit slow. I would say it's actually a very deliberate pace and trying to find the right balance and trying to find the right solutions. Obviously, when you're going to Indonesia, Vietnam, you have very different situations than what you would see in Singapore in terms of maturity, in terms of availability of major infrastructure. So I think governments are really trying to define the right balance between their different objectives. But I definitely see the sustainability agenda being more and more a priority and more on, on top of the agenda for all of the governments in the region.
Jay, I guess for you, this is the most difficult question, given the fact that Petronas is a government-owned company. Is there a role for the company itself to maybe try and push the agenda on this front? How does that relationship work in your mind?
I think, if we look at it globally, because we're operating in a lot of countries, as you mentioned, even in Asia, the approach from different governments, different countries is very different. In Malaysia, the government is crafting its national energy policy. It's relooking at its energy mix and its sustainability approach. And obviously, as a key player in that energy industry, we would be involved in helping set that policy, providing inputs from what business can do. And in some areas, of course, we're leading the way because we also have committed to a net zero carbon target by 2050. Business and government in this whole sustainability area has got to go hand in hand. So they've always got to be clear about what businesses can do and what technology can do. And from the government side, we also need to inform them on what kind of levers they can do to help achieve these goals.
I'm glad you mentioned technology there, Jay.
The balance is the difficult one.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned technology there, Jay. So tell me about the technology situation. What are the tech challenges involved in achieving your goals?
Right. So if you look at technology, there is a lot out there now that is quite mature that can contribute significantly. So if you think about renewable energy 10 years ago as towards today, it's mature, it's very cost effective, it can compete with most other forms, so no problem. But the regulatory and policy landscape has not necessarily been developed with that in mind. So things like grid, the way the grid network operates, there are both technology but also regulatory and policy issues that are needed to resolve those. And then when you look at the oil and gas industry in general, there are technologies that are key to the whole decarbonization space. So we talked about hydrogen before, I mentioned that one. We set up a hydrogen team within Petronas. Now, the technology to make that cost effective is kind of crucial. We see electrification happening across various areas, but industrial use of fossil fuels, that one is a tough one to completely change. Now, green hydrogen is one of those options, and being able to produce it cheaply, transport it to the customer, and have the use and application, that requires, the development of technology on a scale where it can work.
Camille, for you guys, similar questions apply. I mean, given the breadth and the intensity of your operations. But can you give me a sort of a sense of the difference between the tech challenges upstream and downstream? To what extent are you focusing on various areas of production and capacity for greatest impact? For instance, I mean, do you guys think in terms of at the far end of the downstream chain with renewability and recyclability of the products that you're producing, whether you're thinking about end of life issues?
So we're actually looking, as you say, we operate across the value chain. So across the different products, be it from, electricity generation to transmission and distributions. But what's very common, and the approach that we have across our products is really to look at the life cycle of the product. So we've started actually engaging into discussion on how do you recycle some of the wind turbine panels, make sure you have better products that have less impact to the environment. So really looking in terms of design for sustainability is really something that more and more is taking part of our conversation. I mean, the good news here is typically when you design for sustainability, it very often comes at a lower price, at a low cost for us to be manufacturing those technologies. So it's usually something that goes in hand, which is trying to make the products greener in the sense of being more recyclable. It usually comes with something that makes the product more competitive and obviously more appealing to our customers as well. So definitely something that we're looking at in terms of the downstream implications.
I mean, Ilaria, for you guys, obviously the tech is an important part of the whole conversation about what you're doing. Tell me about how you consider what you're using to achieve carbon goals.
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's really just is EV, right? So, for example, we have strategic partnerships with like Hyundai and Kia since their investment in us 2-3 years ago. And we are making sure we're piloting EV programs. We're making sure the cost efficiency, especially for driver partners, is looked at. In Indonesia, we operate Grab Wheels there, which is a fleet of thousands of EVs, e-mopeds, e-scooters, right? So we're looking at not just for normal transport, but also for our delivery. So how can we help the government reach their target of 20% of transport by 2025 to be EVs? We also, some of our technology look at heat maps, right? Driver congregation patterns. So for example, we operate cloud kitchen business, which is food delivery from certain locations. How do we make sure that the driver's lunch hour is that the charging station is right next to the cloud kitchen so they can actually charge their EVs while they are waiting for delivery to maximize time? Because as you know, a lot of these mega cities have paralyzing traffic, etc. So these are very important to know where people are, when are they doing things, because one of the greatest bottlenecks we see is time. I mean, it takes 2-3 minutes to fill a normal petrol car. It takes 40 minutes to charge an EV. And of course, not to mention where they are that would allow them to do that. So we're definitely
for now, some of the technologies are helping with that.
Hopefully, yes.
Great. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground, guys, but there's an awful lot more to talk about, and not very much time left. So let's do a couple of sort of quick fire questions. I won't put to all of you. I'll ask them individually. Jay, let me just ask you, because of your background, you've now gone into a major corporation like Petronas. I just want you to reflect on the differences between working for a company like Petronas and the challenges facing perhaps smaller companies that are trying to address this carbon challenge. Are there different priorities? Are there different methodologies? What are the considerations involved when it comes to size?
Sure. So I think, having worked at a smaller company and going into a large corporate, it is very different. But the way that we have been setting up our new energy business, the renewables business, it's acting really as a startup within a large corporation. And we're looking at that model right across the group. Because if you look at changing the portfolio mix within the group, it requires quite a lot of new businesses and new technologies to be adapted. And that innovation part is sometimes difficult to be done in an agile way in a large corporation. So one of the issues that we're looking at closely is how do you get that entrepreneurship, that innovation set and mindset within a large corporation like Petronas. And I think that's both exciting. It's exciting for staff. It's challenging because we're nearly 50,000 people, and but it's also really a good opportunity for change.
Yeah. Camille, you're in a similar situation. I mean, given the size of the company, is there how's the conversation go internally about getting buy-in from everybody in the corporation, and particularly from the finance side, I guess? I mean, this has got to be a pretty unique challenge trying to persuade the people on the financial side to come along with goals that are not necessarily aligned with shareholder value?
Well, I think really as you say, the opportunity that we have as a very large organization is you have places where very naturally the shareholder value aligns with, I mean, the question of sustainability and then driving things. But what's really interesting in terms of conversations that we're having within GE, so if you take the energy space, as I was saying before, we have hydro, we have wind, we have solar, we have gas, and we have coal. And as you're looking in terms of where do we give at different assets, how do you place your R&D money? How do you make sure that everyone's getting a fair share within the organization? It's actually a very interesting debate and saying, hey, yes, of course, there is a lot of investment which is going into the newer forms of energy, the cleaner forms of energy. But it's also interesting as you're having those debates in the corporation that money needs to continue to flow to existing business, to business which have been traditionally core, such as gas and steam power. Because if you look, you still have 1,000 gigawatts of coal plants in the world. So you can say, hey, all good, we're going to go full steam going to do renewables. But what also matters is to make sure you address the install base. And that's the same way, like within the corporations, you need to ensure that business that have been contributing a fair amount of revenues and profit in the past are continuing to deliver, because that's the reality. It's true in the outer space, it's true within an organization, and it's probably the same for an oil and gas company. Yes, you'll be investing money in new energies, but your bread and butter continues to be oil and gas. It continues to be gas plant or steam plants. So striking that balance is actually a very interesting debate, both internally and externally.
Are you having that debate at Grab, Ilaria?
Well, I think that for Grab, it's not just transport, right? For us, there's also financial inclusion, there's telemedicine, there's delivery. And for us, another very important thing is to make sure that people have upgradable livelihoods, that they can earn an income and support their family, and be included into the economy. So yes, I think that there's always a tension, because I think if we zoom out a little bit and look at why it's challenging for Southeast Asia, people are just, middle class is just trying to establish itself right now. I mean, it's reaching around 400 million, but when people are still worrying about putting food on the table and not being chased down by loan sharks, and they're still storing cash under their bed, I mean, 70% of Southeast Asia is still underbanked. Are they really going to wake up and say, hey, let me just, think about carbon emission targets? No, right? So we have to make sure that we are allowing people, the masses especially, to be in an empowered position where they can be incentivized to think about climate change as well as being able to earn a living. Yeah.
Given the social perspective that Grab does bring to its operations, as you just described, tell me, how do you approach the problem of metrics? How do you measure? How do you quantify whether you're having an impact, whether you're achieving your goals?
Yeah, I mean, I think that for carbon emission, it is still harder, and so that's why we're really in the process of a lot of work right now. But for fintech and for loans, right, those are easier to look at, especially when we can see, a lot of people that we actually lend money to are drivers and merchants, right? We actually have data to see their income flow, how regular they are at paying back, etc. And then we actually are very committed to each micro story. So our country heads, for example, have WhatsApp groups that have all kinds of drivers and merchants pinging them all day long. And the stories, everyone has a name, and every story has a different situation. So for us, that's really how you measure. And I really, this is not to be facetious or anything, but I think the danger, especially in the developed world, is to just put people into numbers and stats and develop a metric and make sure and try to export it all over the world and to see if they can check the box. That's not how it works really in developing nations. Every box is different, right? Mm-hmm.
Well, how else is it going to work? Jay, I mean, to talk to me about metrics. Do we need to find a standardized one-size-fits-all way of quantifying these things in order that everybody can get on board more easily? Or do we need to acknowledge the complexity, as Ilaria was just talking about there, and try and make specific case circumstances per country, perhaps even per company?
I think if you take a top-down approach where something is developed at the global level. I think this happened under the UNFCCC, for example, under Kyoto. When it was applied to each country, it doesn't work because it doesn't take into account all of the situations. But then again, if everybody does something different, it becomes difficult in the crossovers between those countries. And we're in a very global world today where there's a lot of interaction between those countries. So there has to be some middle ground in that sense. So I feel there is a need for some standardization, but within that standardization, it allows for some different options for the particular situation or the stage in development of the country, the location, etc. So that's the kind of middle ground that we need to get. Now that sounds easier than it is actually to do. But
I was going to say, when are we going to get there? Are we, whether it be a standardized, like the financial accounting standards that we've had for so many decades, whether we get to a system like that for this particular application, or whether we reach a compromise in a multipolar, multi-element system, are we anywhere close to getting there, Camille? Are we at least at a point where everybody can engage to a certain extent in order to try and push the agenda of decarbonization?
I think what's interesting is you can really have two approaches. You can say, hey, as long as we don't have one metric, then we don't move ahead and we need to spend time trying to align. What I find really, really interesting is the number of companies that have embraced a very ambitious carbon target, and they're saying, hey, we know it's not necessarily very easy. We don't have a very clean way of measuring greenhouse gas emissions reductions. And there's a lot of proxies and there's a lot. But what's interesting again is there is a very deliberate direction. And I think one of the places, and just come back to a question you were asking earlier in terms of where governments can help, I think having governments really engage in, hey, what are the metrics? What are the ways that we're going to make something which is comparable, sort of greenhouse gas accounting, to make sure you have proven methodologies to measure people that can verify the level of either true reductions or offset, because obviously as you're looking to carbon neutrality, some people are going to do reductions from their own installations. That's relatively easy to measure, how much electricity have you used from renewables versus other sources, how much energy reductions you've had. But then when it comes to offset, really difficult. So I think creating those metrics, creating those international systems which will be recognized from one company to the other will be great. And hopefully paving the way to carbon pricing then, because if you can measure the abatements, then probably you can give a price to it. But the price and the trust will only come if you have verified ways to measure those emissions.
All right. Guys, it's been a fascinating conversation. I think we've only really ever scratched the surface of the topic. Let me just end with a couple of very quick questions to all of you that I'd like you to sort of give a summary to. The first is the issue of carbon pricing that Camille has just brought up. I want to know how important setting a carbon price is to your company, and you think to the general goal of decarbonization, and how quickly you think that might happen and at what level. So Jay, let me begin with you.
I think it's extremely important. If you look at capital allocation, and this is within a company, but you could apply this elsewhere as well. If you put the right price, so it's got to be a sufficient price to drive the thinking, then you can make sure that capital gets allocated in the most efficient way to reduce what is CO2 equivalent emissions, which have the impact globally. So I really see it as an important point, both at looking at it from the corporate perspective, but also at a global country perspective.
Ilaria, would a carbon price help or hinder GRAB?
I think we're really just trying to figure it out. So for example, we launched in November last year we launched a carbon offsetting program Indonesia as a partnership with a platform, and we're still trying to see if users would really love to calculate their carbon footprint. Can it convert into donations, etc.? So I really will say we are really trying to assess what is the answer for us.
Camille, does GE actually set a carbon price? Do you use one for your own internal purposes?
No, we don't. We don't use internal carbon prices, but we've been operating in Europe where there is a carbon price, particularly for the power and industrial sector, which has actually reached record high in the past few weeks, above 35 euros a ton, which is really showing that more and more this will come. We were actually pretty encouraged by the relaunch of the emission trading scheme in China, where we're really seeing, even though it's still a pilot phase for now, we're seeing good dynamics. So this will shape carbon pricing will shape the way we operate in the different markets, and that's something that we're definitely welcoming as an organization.
Okay, let me finish off then with an imaginary question, guys. I want you to think forward into the future and conceive a world in which your jobs and your goals are made easier and better by something that has happened. What is your fondest wish or desire for us to achieve a carbonless future? What kind of technology do you hope is going to come along to help us? Just give me a sense of your fondest imagination. And it needn't be in the corporate context. Could be. You can talk about whether you think what would make your job easier within the corporate context, or just in general terms, what would your fondest wish be if you were to imagine a carbon-free future? I'll give you a moment or two to sort of ponder that, because I know it's kind of reaching deep into the creative senses. But do you have a goal? Who shall I pick first? Who shall I put on the spot first? Camille, let's go with you.
So I think if you think in terms of technologies, it really comes to the laws of physics. So one of the greatest challenges that we're hearing in the way to sustainability is electrification. Electrification, laws of physics, you can't store electricity for now in the large scale. So at any point in time on the grid, demand and supply needs to be balanced. So, and it's really interesting, in the past 20 years there have been in the energy industry, there's been lots of dreams of sort of distributed generation, which is really, really smaller, localized generation, and storage on the other side. So when I dream of a world in maybe 20 years or 30 years, I think a place where you'll have ways to have demand and supply balance at any point in time was greener technology, which implies distributed generation and storage at a large scale are really where I think we'll make great progress into decarbonization.
Jay, what's your fondest wish when it comes to carbon tech in the future?
Different areas, but obviously, I'm working my day job is in renewables, so I see the potential there already. But there's other areas that need to be addressed. I mentioned hydrogen. Green hydrogen has a lot of potential, but then also the types of technologies that can remove carbon from either the waste streams or be put underground in a cost-effective way, I think have a really important part to play in getting to net zero carbon.
Fantastic. And finally to you, Ilaria.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the technology of that pooling together multiple users into a car is a wonderful idea. It's hard to implement in Asia because of many cultural, safety, etc. reasons. My dream would be that vehicles will be well designed to host more than one passenger at one time, so that effective pooling can actually reduce the number of vehicles and people on the road. And on top of that, technology can also tell you exactly when to avoid what road and where is the optimal place where you can charge your vehicle, etc., so that you are still handling the problem of 600 million plus people moving around in Southeast Asia, but at the same time, you're using the most efficient and comfortable way to make sure that people are transporting in a shared resources way so that you can reduce the carbon emissions or even have none, really.
Fantastic. Thank you very much indeed. Jay, Ilaria, Camille, it's been great chatting with you. And I hope we've managed at least to sort of shed some light on the corporate approach and the corporate challenges when it comes to decarbonization and trying to achieve net zero here in Asia. I'm very, very hopeful that we'll see all three of you at the Carbonless Forum at the end of March. But for the moment, it's been fantastic talking to you, and thanks very much for joining.
Thank you. Thanks, Taimur.
Thank you.
The view on decarbonization from the corporate sector. In the next conversation, we'll be talking about the view from the financial sector. How do financial institutions deal with the problem of decarbonization? What role can fintech play in Asia's challenge? That'll be coming up next week. I hope you can join us for that. And do remember that the Carbonless Asia Forum will take place on the 31st of March. Please check out the website carbonless.asia for more information. But for now, that's it. Thank you for watching, and bye-bye.